Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Notan, one of the most powerful tools that a painter has to create really strong, viable compositions. So here are the things that we're going to talk about in this module. The key principle of Notan and how it's different from the value studies that we did back in Module 1. How to recognize Notan structures from direct observation, from standing right in front of the landscape, figure, or still life that you're working from. The role of shape recognition in seeing the Notan pattern. How to link areas of light and dark that you've determined from those shapes to simplify your shapes. And useful technology tools that are out there that can help you get started with seeing the Notan. So first off, let's talk about what Notan actually is. Notan is the balance of light and dark, the balance of those light and dark shapes. At the top, you can see a photograph of the Congaree Swamp, and at the bottom, you can see the Notan study that I did from that image to develop my final painting of the same subject. Notan is a term that has been around for over 100 years, and it is a Japanese term that refers to the relationship or pattern of the dark and light in a composition. It's very closely related to the Western concept of figure ground or gestalt, that relationship of the figure to what it's up against, with some slight variations. What it's not is simply a two-value study. It's not mapping out the range of values in a composition like a thumbnail does. That's what we did in Module 1. Instead, it's an abstraction of the shapes of light and dark values that helps you to begin to flatten out the three-dimensional space that you're looking at into a two-dimensional space that you're painting. Creating a strong Notan dramatically increases the likelihood of creating a strong composition. And that's the goal that most of us have when we're painting. If the patterns of light and dark break up the picture plane in an interesting way, the final painting will probably work even if you totally blow the color relationships. Now, I don't mean by that to go and pay no attention to color. It's just that if you have the Notan right, you've got the underlying structure, the basic bones of the composition down, and almost anything you hang on it after the fact is going to not get in the way of that strong underlying structure. So if creating that Notan dramatically increases the likelihood of creating a strong composition, then we need to look at some of the ways that artists can train themselves to see those strong value relationships. The whole idea of Notan goes back to the work of Arthur Dow, who was a very, very great painter and instructor in the late part of the 19th century into the early part of the 20th century. Some notable artists that studied with Dow are people like Georgia O'Keeffe. She credited him with much of her ability to compose in her paintings. And to paraphrase Dow, the function of painting is not to copy objects, but to create harmony through the use of the compositional elements. So he's not advocating that you simply render your subject, but rather that you learn to create harmony through the use of compositional elements. Notan was a concept that he learned of through his study of Japanese art, and one that he offered to the rest of the Western world through his teachings. He wrote a wonderful book on composition that I'm going to link to in the bottom. It is out of copyright, so you can actually download it from Gutenberg Press yourself if you want to read it. You can order a paperback copy of it from Amazon, and they'll print it on demand. But you can put it on your iPad and have it to refer back to. The language is a little stilted at times, but it's still such a really great reference that I strongly recommend it. I think it's well worth looking at. So Dow came up with the composition, or brought the composition to the West. And we're going to reproduce some of the steps that Dow talked about taking when you're working from observation. The first thing to think about is how to recognize those Notan structures when you're working from direct observation. And one of the key concepts in doing that is to recognize that all of the gray values, the middle ones, are going to have to be assigned to either the dark or light shapes in the Notan, since true Notans only have two values, black and white. You'll see people describe 3 and 4 value Notans at times. Those are not really Notans. At that point, what they're looking at are value studies. So I want us to stick with simply 2 value Notans. Avoid those descriptions of 3 and 4 value Notans. There are a number of ways to start seeing those simplified values. So we're going to start by looking at the pattern and shape of the lights and darks. So you want to visually, in your mind, connect those darks together to form an overarching pattern of value. That's a little hard to do at first. So one of the things that you want to do to begin with is to squint so that you're seeing simply value. When you close your eyes just a little bit and minimize the amount of light coming in, it eliminates the hues that you're seeing, and you're left with mainly values. At first, when you squint, you're going to see pretty much a grayscale image like a black and white photograph. That's helpful, but it's not pushing it far enough, because we want to shove the values into either the camp of being white or the camp of being black. So everything has to go one way or the other. So at that point, you need to keep squinting and squint some more. When you do that, you'll begin to see those darks and the lights separating out. Now, this version of the photograph still has some gray values in it. And there are a number of different ways that I could have looked at that and interpreted it and made decisions about which was which. But I want you to, at this point, begin to see that pattern of dark and light. You may have a hard time at first, but squinting really is one of the best tools that you've got. Look closely at the darks. We're going to worry about the grays and the whites in a minute. Keep squinting and record those dark value shapes with a black marker or with a palette knife or a brush and just black paint. Do not get involved in mixing other values at this point. Once you've made those decisions about where the blacks are, now you have to make some decisions about where the grays are going to go. So you have to assign those middle grays to either the light area or the dark area. So let's move to the next stage. So you've got to, after you've assigned a value mass into either light or dark, you've got to deal with those grays. So you can push those gray values either to the lights or to the darks. And we're going to look at 2 different distinct Notans that I developed from this photograph based on assigning the middle grays either to the darks or to the lights. So make a choice. You're not throwing away the opposite. You just want to see which one works best for you. And again, at this point, you want to record those gray shapes now, if the ones that you've assigned to the darks, with the black marker or the knife or brush. Don't worry about recording the ones that you've assigned to the light. At this point, we're only recording the dark. So in this image, I've assigned the gray values that you saw in the last photograph to the darks. I have pushed those values way far out into the dark so that the composition is now predominantly dark in value. You want to look at the links between the shapes. So look at the connections between those shapes and look at how they link together. So if I were going to draw this off with my pencil, and let me see if I can make this jump to I would assign most of this to black. And when I look at the pattern, I can see how those darks break up the lights and record them real quickly with the marker. I'm going to pretend the red here is my black Sharpie marker and begin to fill this space in so that what you're seeing is mainly the darks. So let's take just a second here and finish filling this in. Turn the photo off in a minute so that you can see those. And you might not have noticed those patterns to begin with, but once you start looking more and more closely, they'll begin to register. Notice that a lot of the shapes, given the landscape that I was working with, are vertical. Lots and lots of vertical shapes. So looking at the Notan really helps you to begin to see the dominant kinds of shapes that are in the area that you're working in, so that then you can include those in your final composition. I think I can make that a little bit bigger so that that goes a little faster. Got a giant marker now, the Mondo marker. One of the reasons that I suggest a Sharpie to do this is the Sharpie has a big tip and you cannot get caught up in details when you do that. And that's one of the most important things to think about, is not getting all into the little finicky details, but looking at the basic overall patterns. So I'm not worrying about those individual little tree limbs that are there. I'm looking at the basic directions. I want to record as many of those as I can. Again, see how vertical it is? Very, very vertical composition. And I want to keep putting the emphasis on that verticality in the way that I draw it, because it's those vertical patterns that give people the feeling of the swamp, which is mainly tall trees and their reflections in the water. And we're almost there. Using that big tool helped get through it faster. It's leaving out some of the details of the edges, but that's okay for right now. You can get a little more detailed if you want to when you do it. So let's turn the photo off underneath so that you can see the basic Notan. And you can see how strong those verticals are, and the remaining outlines of the white shapes then become real clear to see. And that's not, again, a map of the value relationships. It's looking at the relationships of the lights to the darks. So if I was indicating the picture plane, it would go like that. And we're going to go, oops, we're going to go back to, make that go away. I'm going to go back to the original Notan drawing that I did in just a few minutes so you can see that. But here you can see the relationship of that Notan to the edge of the picture plane. Always draw the edge of the picture plane off too, so that you see the relationship of those shapes to the edge. It's really, really important for defining where the lights are in particular. So that's the basic Notan of that photograph, that image. Let's look at the image again. And here is the Notan that I just now drew. And I'm going to show you the Notan that I did. Oops. The Notan that I did in my sketchbook of that. So you can see how I've assigned the grays to a particular shape, and how I was looking closely at that strong vertical direction and orientation of the shapes, and making sure that I've got a pleasing arrangement. One way to do that, a good rule of thumb when you're assigning the values, is to make sure that one value dominates. So you either want it to be predominantly light or predominantly dark. So think of being at least 60% dark or 60% light. Avoid a 50-50 split. That 50-50 split is just not as visually engaging to the viewers. So keep that in mind as you're working on it. And I wanted to show you how this overlays the original photo. And I didn't trace it, but it's pretty close. The more that you do this, the more accurate you're going to get without having to trace. It's fine when you're starting out to trace the images, to trace those lights and darks so that you can see where they are. Okay, there's a little too light. So there we are. You can see how the darks are overlaying the dark areas in the photograph. And now how I made some decisions about how I was going to lay the lights in. So for example, down here in this lower left part, I have assigned some of those gray values into the lights. I haven't made them as super dark as I might have. So that was a choice I made as I was working. So that is the Notan sketch. Now, I did this one in pencil. Again, I'd recommend that you do yours with a marker, because that will help you to get a flat shape. I don't want you to get caught up in rendering lots of different values in there. So use the marker to keep it flat, or use, when you're working in your sketchbook, when we work on some exercises shortly, you're going to use the brush or the palette knife. So we're going to move from marker and pencil in the sketchbook to creating some Notans on either gesso paper or gesso canvas or whatever surface you want to work on that's not too precious. So we're going to work on that in just a second. I wanted to show you the final painting that I did from that Notan sketch as well. And so you can see how I've encapsulated the darks in that central area and used the value relationships between the lights and the darks to create a strong, balanced composition. One of the things that's so important to understand is that there's not a single correct Notan. There are multiple possibilities and almost an infinite number of possibilities. So that, and I think that becomes really important when we're talking about technology and using technology as an assistant. So there are lots of tools out there that you can use that will help you to see the Notan in a photograph or in a scene, and they can be wonderful. A lot of purists will take issue with me on that, but I really do believe in using what technology tools are available to help you see more clearly. Now, I want to emphasize there, though, that they're a tool. You should not become dependent on them. Use them for a little while until you begin to see it with your own eye and put the tool away. The tools can create some problems on their own because they don't see the infinite possibilities. The tools only see one correct solution. So you're going to begin to think there's only one way to construct that Notan if you become dependent on the tool. Instead, use it as a jump start and then develop your own observations. So once you begin to start seeing, put that tool away. So here are some tried and true tools. Some of them that work really super well. Low-tech option. Take your photograph to the copier, like a Xerox machine or a scanner. Set the contrast as high as it will go and make a copy. The Xerox machine will push the gray values one direction or the other, and it will do what's called posterization, which means that all the middle values are going to be pushed to either black or white. Another tool is to use your computer. If you have a paint program on your computer like Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, Painter, something like that, you can do the same thing. Open your photograph and go to the image menu and select contrast. Adjust it until there are just two values. Again, be careful becoming dependent on that because it's going to pit the same basic relationship each and every time and imply that there is only one solution when in reality there are infinite possibilities. Last, there are a ton of phone and tablet apps. Actually any photo app just about is going to work because you can alter the contrast just like you would with a computer tool. But some particular ones that are useful are Value Viewer, which is only available on the iPhone iOS. It has a Notan filter under Effects. Painter Pal also has a Notan filter under Effects. Snapseed, if you use that and use the Noir filter, it will create a Notan. Aviary is a basic photo editing app, and it will allow you to edit the contrast, which can give you a Notan. And then there's Photoshop Express, which is Photoshop's free app version or very low-cost app version. I'm not super impressed by it. I would try one of the others first. But if you use it, go under Looks and select Silvered, and that will push you towards something that's close to being a good Notan. So I want to show you some of those infinite possibilities that you can create by using a photo editing program or by using your eyeball, that great tool that we have with us most of the time, to explore some of the different possibilities. So you remember that, that is where I wanted to be, sorry. So you remember that the squinting mode gave us this Notan that was predominantly dark. And I want to show you what possibilities might exist if you make one that's predominantly light. So in this case, I would take all of those grays that you see there and push them towards the light values, towards white. When I do that, I end up with this Notan, which is drastically different from the first one that we looked at. This is just as correct and just as visually interesting, but would create an entirely different feeling in the painting. So what I want you to do is to begin exploring Notan in your sketchbook. The demo for this module is going to look at how to create some of those Notans with paint rather than with the marker or the pencil, and then work that into a finished painting. So we're going to start with the Notan and then block in quickly to make something that has more values. Select one of them that works. Hopefully this has been useful for you. These are the things we've gone over in this particular video. the key principle of Notan and how it's different from the value studies we did in Module 1, how to recognize Notan structures from direct observation, the role of shape recognition in seeing the Notan pattern, how to link areas of light and dark to simplify your shapes, and some useful technology tools to help you get started with seeing the Notan. Remember again, don't become dependent on them. Getting comfortable with seeing the Notan or the pattern of lights and darks is really helpful when you're working from direct observation. It doesn't matter whether you're painting plein air or working inside on the figure or still life. The light can change dramatically. If you've got the basic structure of the light and dark patterns down, you're golden. You can still finish your painting. Finding that Notan is also the first major step in being able to translate the three-dimensional world you see with your eye to the flat two-dimensional picture plane. So I want you to test some of these tools out, practice, and let me know how it's going. Thank you again for joining me.